Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Remembering the backdrop of geopolitics this week, what we were just talking about with Courtney McBride, the president of the United States preparing to sit down, it looks like in person, with Vladimir Putin to hammer out a deal or a truce of some sort over Ukraine, having just days earlier threatened Russia with 2 nuclear submarines he said were steaming around Russian waters somewhere in case Vladimir Putin did not pull back or Dmitry Medvedev didn't stop putting wild ideas on social media. It also comes just a couple of weeks after the president talked about the nuclear threat in Pakistan and India when they were staring each other down in a cross-border skirmish. It all coincides with the 80th anniversary. If you hadn't heard this, it was just a couple of days ago. The 80th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima. By the way, tomorrow is the 80th anniversary of the bombing of Nagasaki. Listen to President Trump just a couple of weeks back talking about the brinksmanship that we saw between these 2 nuclear powers.
India, Pakistan was probably going to end up in a nuclear war if they kept, they shut down 5 planes in the last attack, and it was back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I called them and I said, listen, no more trade. If you do this, you're not going to be good. But they're both powerful nuclear nations, and that would have happened, and who knows where that would have ended up.
This idea of speaking so loosely about the prospect of another nuclear conflict on this planet brings us to a new book by historian Garrett Graff, and it's one that I want you to remember. The Devil Reached Toward the Sky. This is an oral history, as you can see on your screen here on YouTube and on Bloomberg Originals, the oral history of the making and unleashing of the atomic bomb. An incredible piece of work here, a piece of journalism. And he's with us right now in studio. Garrett Graff, journalist, historian, and author. It's wonderful to see you. Thanks for coming to see me in person.
Thanks so much for having me.
You said something really compelling the other day. A history book that could be filed under the current events section of your local bookstore. To what extent are we still learning the lessons of 80 years ago?
Yeah, I think that part of the challenge of looking back 80 years at Hiroshima and Nagasaki this week is that in 2025, we are closer to the edge of nuclear danger than I think many people realize, and that we are closer than we have been for much of the last 8 decades in between. You mentioned India and Pakistan, the 2 largest nuclear arsenals to ever come into open conflict earlier this year. We've seen this year the U.S. and Israeli raids on Iran's nuclear program. We have seen in the last couple of weeks, barely even in the last couple of hours, nuclear saber rattling between the U.S. and Russia, both of which, by the way, are engaged in a decade-long, multi-trillion-dollar upgrade to all 3 legs of what you call the nuclear triad, the bombers, the missiles, and the silo-based ICBMs, to carry these weapons forward for generations to come. And the rising geopolitical instability of the United States and questions about our commitment to international alliances is launching new conversations about nuclear proliferation in Europe, in the Middle East, in Asia, even in countries like Germany, where it would have been once unthinkable.
Right.
And I think, in a very weird moment over the next decade, we are probably going to see more countries joining the nuclear club than we have ever seen before.
Well, that's something, too, is we have this domestic debate right now about whether we should start opening more nuclear power plants to feed the electricity needs of AI. How big could this club get?
Well, I think you're seeing these conversations in a lot of places, in the Middle East, to counter the possibility of Iran someday developing a weapon. You're seeing these conversations take place in Asia as countries like Korea talk about, do they need their own nuclear umbrella in order to secure peace with North Korea? You're seeing this in Europe, as the UK and France and other sort of major European powers begin to think about, what does it look like if we can't count on the American nuclear umbrella that we have counted on since 1945?
You speak of umbrellas. You wonder if Oppenheimer could have ever envisioned the Golden Dome.
Yeah, and obviously this is a project that dates back to the Reagan years, if not
Star Wars.
Even earlier, and the challenge of it has always been nuclear weapons are civilization destroying weapons. There's something that is not like any other weapon in the human arsenal, and we house the power to use them in a very precarious system that in the United States is in the hands of the President of the United States himself. There is no second voice in that system. A lot of people think, surely the Secretary of Defense or the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs has to agree with it, or the Commander of Strategic Command. No, the President can carries that nuclear football with him wherever he goes, and can launch nuclear weapons from anywhere that he is at any time.
Remembering the concerns General Milley had about that. This is something that we've experienced in our recent history, at least the concerns thereof. Let's talk about the book, because so many people became sort of armchair experts on the Manhattan Project following the movie. I'd love to know what you thought of that movie, by the way. But you really bring out the scale of this project. The secret cities in Tennessee and Washington State, hundreds of thousands of Americans working on a project that they weren't necessarily familiar with while it was happening.
Absolutely. And that, to me, Oppenheimer is a fabulous movie. It's actually stunningly historically accurate for a movie. But I think too often we over-romanticize and oversimplify the story of the Manhattan Project as the story of J. Robert Oppenheimer and his band of merry physicists on a mesa in Los Alamos. And what you come to understand when you look at the history of the Manhattan Project is the power and the majesty of it is in the industrial might that the United States brings. In some ways, it's a business story. And to me, we talk so often in World War II history about where it was fought. Bastogne, Omaha Beach, El Alamein, Guadalcanal, Leyte Gulf. But World War II was won in the Ford Motor Company bomber factories at Willow Run in Michigan. It was won in the shipyards and landing craft factories of Higgins Industry in New Orleans. And it was won in the Rad Lab in MIT, where radar and the proximity fuse are developed, and the lab of the Manhattan Project, where we build the atomic bomb, where we outbuild and outproduce Germany and Japan. And you're right that so much of the Manhattan Project story takes place in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and Hanford, Washington. I spent a lot of time in the book telling the stories of the voices and the workers in those places. These are cities that are carved out of remote mountain valleys in Tennessee, a desert and farm orchards in eastern Washington that house 100,000 people apiece. By the end of World War II, Hanford, Washington, the largest construction project in World War II in the United States. And that these are facilities where we build and refine the uranium and the plutonium. We're building thousands of houses a month to house these workers. We're building factories, multiple football fields large. The bus system in Oak Ridge, Tennessee,
this blows
on
me away.
August 6th, 1945, is one of the 10 largest public transit systems in the United States. And it serves a city that no one knows exists and doesn't appear on any public map.
Incredible. Where the war was won, fascinating the way you put that. And everyone should understand that this is a narrative history. You conducted and compiled some 500 different voices in this book. And it reads so quickly. You can't put this down, particularly when you're inside the B-29s. The way you put that together was remarkable, with voices from the past. You talked about the people who actually not just made the bombs, but dropped the bombs. Paul Tibbett, Chuck Sweeney. You talk about when they first saw Iwo Jima through that glass cockpit in the B-29. A lot of this hit home for me. My grandfather fought on Iwo Jima, like so many grandfathers of people my age, to liberate those airfields used on a mission like this. I also had the chance to meet Chuck Sweeney, and I flew in a B-29 with him a bunch of years ago on Cape Cod. And they let him fly the plane, by the way. His family was with him. It was Fifi, one of only 2 flying B-29s left in the world, I believe. And he was still so proud of what they accomplished. Not just the drama of what they encountered, and you talk about how that they had to arm the bomb at altitude just in case the plane was lost? Yeah,
I mean, we have imposed sort of 80 years of sort of morality and, complicated, vexing questions on these missions. But what really stands out for me, and as you said, it's an oral history, and so it's all in the first person, the voices of the bomber crew, their memories of the mission of the Enola Gay in Hiroshima on August 6th, Boxcar to Nagasaki on August 9th.
Yes.
And then in those final chapters of the book, this incredible jarring juxtaposition of the celebration of the bomber crews.
This is what I want to get to. Who had no idea what was going on the ground behind them.
The Enola Gay lands back in Tinian in the Marianas Islands. Paul Tibbett, the pilot of the Enola Gay, has medals, pinned on his chest on the tarmac. Wow. And then they go off to a literal celebratory barbecue for their successful mission. Back in Los Alamos, in Oak Ridge, in Hanford, huge parties to celebrate the dropping of the atomic bomb, juxtaposed with what is actually taking place back on the ground, first in Hiroshima, then in Nagasaki. These hurricane strength fire winds destroying and burning the city, tens of thousands of people dead. And I think you see in that sort of split screen moving back and forth between the bomber crews and the Manhattan Project and the survivors in Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Yeah.
The Manhattan Project is simultaneously one of humanity's greatest triumphs and one of humanity's greatest tragedies.
God, that is so true. This is so great spending time with you. We're officially going into overtime here, so give me a couple of extra minutes. That dichotomy that you describe is something that's still talked about today. There are a lot of people who feel we never should have dropped the bomb, that it was in fact not necessary to win the war against Japan. There were, in fact, scientists, in many cases Jewish refugees from Europe, who said this isn't why we designed this bomb. That was for Berlin. But when you talk to Chuck Sweeney, or when I used to talk to my grandfather, they'd say that's the only reason you're alive.
Yes.
Because we were preparing for a mainland invasion that would have killed all of us.
Yep.
So how do we rationalize this?
And this is where, again, you see the scientists really split, because some of them are, as you said, the core of the Manhattan Project. They're all mostly Jewish refugee scientists coming over from Europe who started this project, who worked on it day in, day out to stop Adolf Hitler from getting the bomb first.
Yes, right.
And by the time, and their reaction is not, we shouldn't use the bomb, it's that we're too late. It's, I wish we had this bomb in 1944 and could have dropped it on Berlin.
Yeah.
Since we missed that and Hitler didn't get the bomb, let's not use it. Then there are the scientists, and I quote some of them in the book, who are sort of like your dad, who they have family members caught up in the war.
That's right.
Who they can name. One of the women scientists, Leona Woods, core member of the Manhattan Project, she's talking about her brother is a Marine flamethrower on Okinawa.
There you go.
And he was headed to the Japanese home island invasion. She knows he's alive because she invented the atomic bomb.
That's right. And so these Marines, for the most case, who are planning an invasion, are suddenly tasked with disarming Japanese officers. What an incredible historic turn. So it begs the question, Garrett Graff, if we hadn't used it then, would we have ever used it? Or maybe a better way to ask it is, if it weren't for using it then, would we be preparing to use it now?
Well, I think one of the questions we'll never really be able to answer in the context of history is the dropping of the atomic bomb the last act of World War II, or is it the first act of the Cold War?
Wow.
And how much of the U.S. pressure and decision was really about demonstrating to the Soviets that we have this weapon as we begin to think about the geopolitical landscape afterward. I think it took using the bomb in combat for us as a society, certainly for the U.S. government, to recognize that this is not like any other weapon, that this is not something that we should ever use lightly. And in fact, it is Dwight Eisenhower as president who really draws those first lines against in Korea, in the Suez crisis, in other crises during his presidency, really makes clear this is not like any other weapon, and we can't ever use it. And it becomes the central defining, organizing principle of international geopolitics ever since, to never use these weapons again. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this project right now for the 80th, as we mark sort of the passing of the last survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, is I think it's worth remembering how terrible these weapons are, and that it's up to us in our time to carry forward their life's mission, that they are the last survivors of an atomic bomb.
There's no reason to say another word. That was beautifully put, and I'm so happy you came to talk to us about it. The book, again, is The Devil Reached Toward the Sky, and you'll hear the oral history, the actual firsthand account of what that looked like as this massive mushroom cloud rose even higher in the altitude, in the air, than the B-29s that dropped the bombs. It's dramatic, stark, piercing, historical narrative history from Garrett Graff. Thank you again for sharing it with us.
Thanks so much for talking about it today.
It's great to have you here. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. Thank you for being with us on Balance of Power. Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.